So good evening and thank you for joining us this evening. You are most welcome. My name's Angus Armstrong, a member of the CED Executive Committee, and I organise these tech talks. All our talks are recorded and available on CED's website and, and our YouTube channel, and this should be available shortly after this talk. This is the, it says third here. I think it might be the fourth talk in this series, and I hope you find it very interesting. Tonight's talk is presented by Stephen Burgess. Stephen graduated in 1977 and subsequently did an MSc in Soil and Water Engineering at Silesill College, part of Cranfield University. And Stephen's worked with the Anglican Church with Community Development Department of the Anglican Church in Kenya for many years, promoting and implementing WASH, which stands for Water, Sanitation and Health. It's a broad subject, but one method to promote safe drinking water was SODIS. And you'll find out what that means. This evening's talk is about SODIS, which stands for Water Disinfection. We have these talks on the third Thursday of the month at 7 o'clock, and you'll be very welcome to join us later on. If you want to be added to the mailing list and you're not already on it, then drop me an email or contact someone from CED and we'll make sure that that happens. We have two more talks coming up in the remainder of the season, assuming everything falls into place, including travel and health in developing countries, which I'm particularly keen on, and also solar power for remote locations, which again should be very interesting. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Stephen, and you can take it from there. So I'm going to pin you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Pin.
Oh, thanks very much, Angus. Well, it's good. Thank you for inviting me to talk about SODIS, and I'm going to just sit up a bit. And you can see I'm wearing a t-shirt, and you will see the significance of that later in my talk, which says SODIS. And on the back of the t-shirt, it also talks about SODIS, solar disinfection of water. And it says, Tumia miali ya jua kupata maji safi ya kunywa. That's Swahili, and I'll explain more about that later. But it is great to be able to talk to you. And I've been a member of CED, I think, from the very beginning, in 1986. Not a terribly active member. I did do some work in Bubisa, and you may have come across that in your records for CED at one point, and that's in northern Kenya. And I entertained one of your board members one time when we tried to climb up Mount Kenya, but got stuck in the mud on the way. So it wasn't very successful, but we had a good weekend together. So today I want to talk about SODIS, and I'm going to do this by sharing a PowerPoint. But before I do that, I'm going to give you the elevator pitch. You've heard of the elevator pitch. Is that if you're in an elevator and you've got to tell them something significant, you've got the distance of the elevator going down, up and down. Okay, so to get clean water suitable for drinking from your spring or well, like Angus gets water from the spring, take a plastic bottle, could be 2 liters in size like this, fill it full of your dirty, in inverted commas, water, put it in the sun for 6 hours, or put it in the morning and leave it there till evening. And the ultraviolet radiation of the sun will kill the pathogens or the germs in the water, and then it's safe for drinking. That's SODIS. Let me share my screen. Moves that down. So I wanted to share today about SODIS, solar disinfection of water, the idea and the experience. And I hope you can read that. I was working in the Anglican Church, as Angus said, in the Christian Community Services, and I was just a staff member, but my responsibility was giving technical support to the community development program on water and sanitation, because we were working mainly with rural groups, rural communities who didn't have access to safe water, didn't have access to good sanitation. So from something like 1998 until 2005, when I left, we were promoting SODIS, and I want to share that experience with you. So what is SODIS? But then share the experience of communities using SODIS and what they said about it. And then introduce you to a place where you can find more information about SODIS. So SODIS stands for Solar Disinfection, SODIS. And so I was working in Kenya, in the on the eastern side of Kenya, in what they called ACK Eldoret region, water supply, water and sanitation program. And there's a three-part approach to getting safe water. So prevention of water, prevention of contamination by looking for cleaner sources than the river or the stream or whatever. So rainwater catchment, protection of springs, protection of wells. The second approach was behavior change in hygiene and sanitation, and using some tools like FAST, which is participatory hygiene and sanitation transformation. And in a similar way, working with schools, promoting hygiene through child to child. So teaching children about hygiene, and they become the ambassadors to other children in the school, and conservation of the environment. When we come to household water treatment or household water supply, so reducing the risk of getting sick from the water by using things like SODIS. We have to remember that there are other ways of getting clean water: chlorination, boiling, filtration, three-pot method. There are other methods. So this is one of the methods of household water treatment. The challenge is for those, CED knows this very well. The challenge is how to get the clean water. 2.2 million. This is a statistic from 2005. 2.2 million children die from waterborne diseases annually in the world. And in Kenya, less than 50% have access to safe drinking water. And if you look at the sources in those pictures, you can see the problem. So this is a challenge. And the communities we were working with said to us, how can we get safe drinking water? How can we make our water safe for drinking and free from disease? So this is what SODIS is. Is there a little bar across the screen at the bottom, or is it just me seeing that?
With the number of participants and such like?
No, I've got a little bar which is stopping me see the whole screen. But if you can't see it, that's okay. I can keep talking.
The full scope of Figure 1 SODIS steps.
Okay, great. So this is how you do it. You take, as I said, you take a bottle, and 2 litre size is a good size to take. It could be smaller. It could be like a 1 litre bottle, or even a ½ litre bottle. PET bottle, it works best. Clean it, make sure it's not scratched or got labels on it and everything. Fill the bottle with water, and then fill it right to the very top so there's no air gap, and close with the lid well. Expose the bottles to the sun from morning to evening for at least 6 hours. And normally you put them in the sun on a rack, on a piece of corrugated iron, or you could put some on a corrugated iron roof. And after 6 hours, the water is now ready for drinking. And you drink the water, you take the water into the house because it'd be a bit warm, let it cool down. If you have a fridge, put it in the fridge, but drink the water straight from the bottle. Don't put it in another container like a pot, because that's a source of recontamination. So here are some examples of people talking about SODIS, and this is SODIS in practice. You may see that in this picture, there are some bottles which are painted half black, like this one that I have. You see it's half black. The methodology of SODIS has changed with time, and so initially it was recommended that the bottles be painted half black and even put on a black piece of tin to increase the heat in the water. But subsequently, the advice is simpler. Just use clean bottles, no need to paint, and just put it on a reflective surface. No need to paint it black. So it makes it simpler. So that's, you can see we're in Eldoret and with the Christian Community Services. We are working with women's groups. We're working in the more fertile areas. We're also working in some of the ASAL areas promoting SODIS. So what is needed to practice SODIS for household drinking water supply? Several PET plastic bottles, 2-litre size or less. Probably, if you had 6 to 8 bottles, that would be good. And I'll explain why. A galvanized iron sheet surface. And of course, the sun. So what we're using here are things which are essentially recyclable, reusable bottles are found in the community after drinking water has been taken from them, or other, squash or soda or something like that. So the bottles are often thrown away, so we can use old bottles, providing they're not too scratched. The sun, again, is just a free source and you expose it for 6 hours on a sunny day, or 2 days when cloudy, when there's more than 50% cloud cover. And make sure that the bottles you choose are not scratched or dirty in any way. So that's what you need, very simply. So the steps for SODIS in practice are, if you're a household, draw water from the source, allow the water to settle if necessary. Sometimes the water you might collect, it will be cloudy or turbid. And it's recommended that water of a turbidity of less should have a turbidity of less than 30 NTU. This is notional turbidity units. So if it is very cloudy, it won't work. SODIS doesn't work well. So you have to allow the water to settle, or you can even filter it through a cloth or something to get rid of the dirt in the water. But of course, as we know, we're engineers, we know that bacteria and viruses and protozoa and other things in the water can't be seen by the naked eye. So they're still there in the water, even if it's been allowed to settle. Fill the bottle completely and close, and then expose to the sun all day. This is the simple message: expose to the sun all day. There's no real need to time it. Just put it out in the morning, in the evening, bring it in. Pour the water in the bottles and use from bottle to cup. Now, for SODIS in practice, if you're a family, it's probably a good idea to have 6 to 8 bottles, because you put 3 or 4 bottles out in the morning on day 1, and you expose it to the sunlight. And so the SODIS process continues. And then you bring those 4 bottles in. The next day, you put 4 new bottles out, and you use the ones that you had SODIS the day before during the day. So you rotate and then you can just keep rotating those 8 bottles as need be. So that's why I say 6 to 8 bottles. And there's a lady, it's not Eldoret, but a lady somewhere who's using SODIS. So here she's put the bottles on the roof of her house on a kind of a reflective surface in the sun. So what is SODIS? Solar disinfection, it's using the sunlight, and the sunlight has 2 main components that are used in SODIS: the ultraviolet, UVA, and the infrared. And there's a synergy between the 2. The ultraviolet, and this synergy, the ultraviolet together with the infrared, the ultraviolet acts on the oxygen in the water, which creates radicals which attack the cells of the pathogens, and the infrared warms up the water and speeds up that process. So can you see that little graph there? And the graph shows it's measuring the number of fecal coliforms present in the water during the process of SODIS during the day, and you can see the coliform count as during the sunlight during the day, the UVA dose being along the x-axis. During the day, the amount of ultraviolet getting into the water increases, and as the temperature increases, it reaches a critical point when it acts on the pathogens in the water, and so the fecal coliform count drops drastically. So that's how SODIS works. It's a dual thing between ultraviolet and infrared. The ultraviolet is more, both are important, but the ultraviolet is extremely important because of the way the ultraviolet acts on the oxygen in the water and creates these free radicals which attack the pathogens in the water. Is that clear? Are you okay with that graph?
Yep,
Yep.
I'm good with that.
Okay. So that in a sense is what SODIS is and what it's about. And how did we experience this in Eldoret? So what we did in Eldoret was we started promoting this with community groups and teaching them about SODIS. And one of the key things to do was to convince them that SODIS really worked, that it really did kill the germs. Because it was a very difficult, many people used to think that if the water is clear, then it's safe for drinking. Now we know that clear water may not necessarily be safe for drinking. So talking to people about germs in water, they don't use the word pathogens, or in Swahili it's viini, very small things in the water which cause sickness. People did understand that dirty water or river water could cause sickness. So, but helping people to understand that the water could be contaminated, and that is what is causing diarrhea and other waterborne diseases. So we did a lot of water testing, and this is a test I did lots of testing using a Del Agua water pressure membrane testing kit. So we were testing for the indicator organism is the indicator is fecal coliform. So it was testing the water and counting the number of fecal coliform in the water. And what you can see here is a test on some raw river water, and the blue dots indicate the number of fecal coliform. And after 1 day SODIS on a sunny day, you can see that the blue dots have disappeared, which shows that the water is safe, potentially, I say potentially safe for drinking, because it's a little bit more complicated than that. But what the SODIS has done within 6 hours, 1 day of SODIS, is killed those pathogens which are harmful to human health. But what you can see is some other little dots. And there are bacteria and present in water which are not harmful to human health. So SODIS doesn't sterilize water. It is solar disinfection. It's disinfecting it. It's making it safe for drinking. A very important distinction if you're talking to people about SODIS. And then we just carried on for another day, and you can see that after 2 days, even some of those other dots disappeared as the ultraviolet acted on the water. So showing things like this to community groups was quite convincing of the effectiveness of SODIS, of being able to make their water clean for drinking. And here's another one. This was using a slightly different test kit that we had. And these were some membrane plates, which were very easy to use because we just put the water on a membrane and then kept it warm for 23 hours. And you could do that by putting it in your top pocket at 37 degrees. And but it gave a good indication of, on the right-hand side, the raw water of a spring, and then on the left-hand side, after SODIS. And so doing lots and lots of tests, we did hundreds and hundreds of tests on different sources of water in order to show ourselves, to learn ourselves, but also to show community members what was the impact of SODIS on water. Something else we did was we wanted to measure, so that's the technical aspect, and I've got some more information when you ask some questions about, there's a lot more information available. A lot of research has been done on the efficiency of SODIS to eliminate bacteria, to eliminate viruses, to eliminate protozoa like amoeba. And so there's a lot of research has been done on that, and I can show you some of that a little bit later if you want to see that. But one thing we wanted to do was to kind of do a study with the people who were practicing SODIS after a couple of years of promoting SODIS with community groups. We chose a group of people, and we did a household health survey for 12 months because we wanted to know, what's the impact? Is it making a difference? So we chose 90 SODIS users and 90 non-users from 3 different communities, some from more farming areas, some from more remote areas, some from urban, and one from a peri-urban area. And we asked them, what was the incidence of waterborne diseases over a period of 12 months? So this is a summary of that. So you can see here that over 12 months, what to move. That's it. You can see that the users are the dark red, the purple, and this is on the y-axis is the number of cases of diarrhea, or number of cases of what they thought was typhoid, or the number of cases what they thought was dysentery or cholera. And then the blue group are the users of SODIS. And what comes out from this is very, very clearly can be seen that the SODIS users had far less incidences of waterborne diseases than the non-SODIS users. It was you know, it was a survey by going to people and asking them, have you been sick this month? What have you been sick with? Or anybody in your family has been sick. Now, you know, it's a pretty subjective survey survey in some ways, because they may not know exactly what they're sick with. But the indication from this is very clear that the use of SODIS did decrease the number of waterborne diseases, because those extenuating circumstances were the same for both groups, the users and the non-users. Okay, so we can conclude that the outcome of 3 times less waterborne disease for SODIS users. And this was conducted over 12 months. So we also asked the community in sort of focus group discussions, what are some of the positive things that they think about SODIS? So these are some of the comments. I use SODIS now every day. It provides for my whole household drinking water needs. SODIS is easy to use. I put the bottles out in the morning and forget about them. And in the evening after work, I bring them in. SODIS water tastes good. Before I used to boil my water, and the smoke from the fire gave the water a bad taste. I think we can relate to some of these. SODIS saves time. I do not need to go out and collect so much firewood. So these are particularly for people who use firewood as their main source of fuel for boiling water. And SODIS is cheap, and we can get the bottles for ourselves. And SODIS does make water safe. We no longer get headaches, which are associated with typhoid and diarrhea. So these are some of the comments from users of SODIS. We also, in our focus group discussions, we asked them what they think about other methods of getting household water, and how do they compare SODIS with other methods. Again, this is a very subjective thing. And the criteria really was, does whatever method you use kill germs? That's the determining criteria. So other things that you have might be of importance to people are ease of use, cost, taste, adequacy, and the mineral content of the water. So when you do these focus group discussions, you rate and rank each of those criteria and see what comes out. So this is the result of these focus group discussions with those 90 people. But they felt, and I say they felt, this is not science in the sense of this is true for everybody. This is what they felt, that SODIS does meet the determining criteria of killing germs. It's easy to use, it doesn't cost much, it tastes fine, we can get enough water, and it doesn't affect, the taste of the water, the mineral content is fine. And they were comparing with things that they also use in the community, like the 3-pot system, where you transfer water from one pot to the next, in order to settle out the dirt in the water. And of course, over time, you know that the bacterial load will reduce if you leave water long enough. It will reduce in some cases. Just taking water from a protected shallow well, some people would filter with a cloth, and I'm interested, someone might know the answer to this. I haven't seen any scientific papers on it, but people say that if you use a double layer or triple layer of we call it a kitenge, a cloth that the African women wrap around them, it's fine enough to get rid of amoeba. Filtration with cloth, it does have some positive effect. Rainwater, of course, rainwater could be contaminated by feces from birds landing on the roof and getting into the water and other things. Alum, which they use for settling water. They didn't really talk about chlorine much, and I think that might have been because of the cost and availability of chlorine in areas where we were working. And then boiling, which most people knew about boiling water. And it did meet the determining criteria, but because of thinking about it in terms of ease of use, cost, taste, adequacy, it didn't rank very highly. But they did, of course, working with communities. They had lots of questions about SODIS, particularly in the beginning. Does SODIS kill all the germs in the water? Can we use clear bottles for SODIS rather than half black? And we changed our message halfway through, not halfway through that health survey, but we did change our message to people over the period of time we were promoting SODIS in Eldoret, from half black bottles to clear bottles. How do we get sufficient bottles, especially in the remote areas? That was, in the remote areas, was a challenge. Around the towns, there was a good supply of second-hand bottles. And one way to get those was, we had someone who wanted to just earn a few, earn their living, and so they went around and collected bottles, which we used in our program of promoting SODIS. And of course, individuals could do that for themselves. During the rainy season, will SODIS be effective? Because SODIS works on sunlight and heat, to a less extent heat, but sunlight and heat. So during the rainy season, when it's cooler and when there's less sun, when it's cloudy, SODIS isn't as effective, which is why the recommendation that you leave it out for 2 days to get sufficient quantity of ultraviolet light to pass through the water. But obviously in winter in England, we're not going to get enough ultraviolet to have efficiency of SODIS. But in the summer, yes, we would. How long should SODIS water be kept? And this is concerns of regrowth of microorganisms. There have been some research done on this, and really the recommendation is that don't keep the water for too long, because you need to drink water anyway, just drink it. There haven't been the research that has been done shows that there is some regrowth, but it's very slow and it varies according to the initial quality of the water in the first place. Care needs to be taken to keep bottles and tops clean and replacing scratched or broken. So this is, and in training community members, all of these challenges were addressed. So we would do more training. I thought I might say a little bit about training. We started once we had within the Christian Community Services, once we had established that SODIS is a viable method to get clean water ourselves and learned about it ourselves, which was the first step. We then trained 30 SODIS promoters. So these were people who worked with those community groups, volunteer people in the community, helping them to use SODIS. And then we had within the Christian Community Services, we had employed staff who were also trained in SODIS. So they were supporting those community volunteers. So training SODIS promoters, that they have the knowledge of what is SODIS, this new innovative method for getting clean water, and then producing, information, education, and communication materials. And that's why I showed you these kind of things. This is a headscarf for ladies, which they could wear. We had, you'll see later, we had various things that you could stick on a bottle, in just a small thing to talk about SODIS when you're promoting it. Although normally you wouldn't want to have anything on the bottle. And there was a slightly bigger one. You can't really see that, sorry. But so we produce lots of materials to promote SODIS, and we even had in Eldoret town, we had a sort of a launch of the SODIS program, and going through the town and talking to people and attending shows, agricultural shows and things like that. So really trying to promote SODIS amongst the population in the towns and with the community groups we were working with. So identifying key community users within the groups who are already part of the water and sanitation or the community development program, because the water and sanitation aspect was only part of the community development work that was going on. I talked about extensive water testing to show the results of SODIS, very important in terms of promoting. And we linked up with the government public health department. So in the districts where we were working, the public health department were concerned about safe drinking water. So we talked to them, we trained them, and their staff also became part of the promotion process. And I think that's very important, because people may or may not believe some NGO or some group promoting something new that they believe it really works. But if the public health department of the government has has authority, and so working with them was very important, and involving them in the promotion process would help to make the use of SODIS more sustainable. And then one important thing was constant follow-up. So the trained SODIS promoters were constantly going around and talking to members of the community about using SODIS and monitoring how they were using it. We produced some of our own leaflets, got lots of leaflets. There's one there in Kiswahili, there's one there in English. Very simple leaflets, nothing too fancy, but we had a whole range of information. So we had the elevator pitch, we had the sort of 1 hour seminar, we had the 2-day workshop, and the training promoters, and then we had continual follow-up. You will see, if you look very carefully in the one in English, you will see that it says shake the bottle, step 3, shake the bottle for 20 seconds. And this was what was initially the recommendation by the organization who have done research on SODIS, and I'll tell you about them later. And that was to add oxygen into the water, because the ultraviolet acts on the oxygen to create these free radicals which attack the pathogens in the water. But they found that if you have too much oxygen, it has a detrimental effect of the action of producing free radicals. So they now suggest that you don't shake the bottle to add more oxygen. Very interesting how things move on. Here's some leaflet from another group in Kenya who are also promoting SODIS, and in Swahili, talking about, that you're very happy when you have clean water because of SODIS. So for sustainable dissemination and practice of SODIS, consider these three things. And I think this is true for any intervention we try to make with people. Knowledge, attitude, and practice, KAP. We need to teach people and promote SODIS. We need to teach them so they have enough knowledge. And then their attitude, do people believe in SODIS? And then practice, encouraging people to use SODIS every day, all the time. I'll give you an example of this, which comes from the sanitation aspects we were doing. We know, or what I used to do was this, with the community group, I would say, how many people know that they should wash their hands after going to the toilet? And everybody puts their hand up. And then I say to people, how many people have know that washing your hands gets rid of the germs in water? And they put their hand up. So they know and they have a positive attitude. But how many people actually practice that all the time? And that's at the point where very few people will put their hand up. So we can have the knowledge and we can teach people. We can help them look at their beliefs and attitudes. But we need also to encourage them to practice and use the new technology, if you like, all the time, every day. So using SODIS every day. And this, if we think about this, we get more sustainable dissemination and practice of SODIS. In conclusion, just a quick conclusion from our experience in Eldoret, SODIS does eliminate diarrhea causing pathogens in water. SODIS uses renewable resources and so conserves the environment compared to boiling, particularly water. It saves time. There's no need to collect firewood and boil water. It has a positive effect on community health in reducing waterborne diseases. And it has been adopted by user groups who find it easy to use and cheap. But we did find that availability of bottles is a key factor in widespread promotion of SODIS, particularly in very rural areas. So you might have to think about setting up a supply chain for getting bottles to communities. And maybe they even have to buy the bottles just at a small cost, because if they don't have enough bottles, you can't use SODIS. Now, there's a group which Angus mentioned in the preamble for this meeting, called EOWAG, which is the Swiss Institute for Water and, I can't remember, Water and Technology. Anyway, there's a person who works with EOWAG called Regula Meyerhofer, and that was someone I worked with when we were promoting SODIS in Eldoret. And she has produced, by looking at SODIS use across the world, there are approximately 3 million people using SODIS across the world. And she's been part of that program for 25 years. And she talked about factors influencing the sustained use of SODIS. One of them being local availability of bottles, repeated promotion and training programs, commitment of the promoters, especially if they're volunteer promoters. Are they committed? Are they telling, do they have the knowledge? Do they tell the right story to people? The educational level of users, and this isn't the lack of education. Sometimes the people who are most skeptical are those who are more educated, teachers, doctors, medical people. They say it can't possibly work. Social pressure. Maybe some people think this, you know, it's a low-tech process. And so people like high-tech things because that's part of my status. So there's social pressure both ways. Social pressure to use SODIS, but there's social pressure that this method isn't good enough. It's not modern. And institutional aspects. I talked a little bit about that in terms of how we relate with the government, the public health department. And I added, that's what she said, and I added one, the belief and attitude of users is very important for sustained use. Just to share my experience there, I wrote to the Christian Community Services in Eldoret the other day and asked them, could you tell me how many people are still using SODIS? And what are the reasons why they may not be using it, if they're not using it? And they went round and talked to people in the community groups, particularly those 90 people who we did the household survey with. And about 20% are still using SODIS. And this is nearly 20 years after we did that initial work. And the two reasons they gave, two main reasons for not using SODIS. One was when some of the groups had piped water systems, so they had an access to better water supply from a pipe, so they don't need to use SODIS. That was fine. Another group, or a few other people, talked about there's a risk of getting cancer from migration of particles from the bottle, which is exposed to sunlight, into the water. And that's an interesting one. And maybe someone can ask me a question about that, and I will try to answer you. But it was kind of encouraging that there are still some people using SODIS. And so there is, in the group I was working with, there's sustained use of SODIS. But there are other groups, like the one I showed, the other group in Kenya, they haven't been using SODIS because the commitment of the promoters was dropped down. So there are lots of reasons why people don't continue using a new technology, even if they know that it might be useful to them. So I want to stop there from my sharing of my experience of using SODIS for several years in Eldoret. If I was back in Africa, I would still use SODIS. I often say to people, we're Christians here, I believe in two things. One is Jesus, and the other is SODIS. There is an organization called EAWAG, and that's the Swiss Technical Institute. And there is a manual, a SODIS manual, which keeps being updated. And you can see two websites there. One is www.sandec.ch, Swiss. It's based in Switzerland. And you can also go to www.sodis.ch, which is their website in Switzerland, and it links into the EAWAG website. This manual will answer all your questions and more, because it's a manual which gives all the technical things you might need to know about SODIS and people using SODIS, but it also has about 40% of the manual talks about how to promote SODIS in communities. So if you're thinking about promoting SODIS, there's lots of information in this manual. And so I just recommend you look at that if you want to know more. And it gives you lots of information about the research which has been done across the world on SODIS. I think I'll stop there, Angus, and invite some questions. We can always go back. There's a couple of graphs I could show you if someone asks that question, and I'll try and answer any questions. So thank you.
Super, Trudy. Great.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, very interesting what you said. But when I was in Kenya about 10 years ago, I got shown this system in Kitale, not so far from Eldoret, and I was part of a discussion group with an American university, and you talked about people who are very scientific poo-pooing in, and I got chucked off their discussion group because I talked about SODIS, and they said it really wasn't an acceptable form of water treatment, and they didn't want to know anymore. I was upset about that, but I persisted, and we still carried on using it.
Well, I'm glad you carried on using it, because Kitale was one area where we promoted SODIS with the Public Health Department. Did they say why they don't think SODIS works?
Well, they said it works in a limited fashion, but it's not really scientific enough. Not for them anyhow. They were. I think they were. I've been trying to find out the name of the university and the papers they sent or they had online. I think it was they were into quite expensive filtration system, and they said, well, it doesn't filter out stuff. Well, we know that, and I just got banned from their Facebook.
I'm sorry about that. Maybe one way, you know, there are always people who have access to other scientific knowledge which they believe impacts on something you're trying to do. So sometimes you need to weigh up which is the right science. The manual is very good in that it gives you a lot of the science and gives you a lot of the papers which have been, or it gives you a lot of research which has been done on SODIS, on the technology, and it would answer some of the questions they have. So that's that's one way of answering the question. If you use SODIS badly, if you don't use it in the correct way, it's not effective.
I think that could have been one of their concerns. I shall download the manual, read it avidly. Yes.
I do know that when SODIS was being promoted initially in the particularly in the 1990s, there was an American group or people from America who started sending around emails saying that SODIS, if you use SODIS water, you'll get cancer. So EOAG decided to test because of, you know, when you expose plastic to sunlight, it degrades. Okay. So what they did was EOAG said, well, we'll try and see what happens. So they tested the water, which has been SODISed under field conditions, to see what migration of particles there was from the bottle into the water. And they did find that this is in the manual. They did find that there are some compounds which come from the bottle into the water, but the level of the compounds are thousands of times less than the World Health recommended level of these compounds in drinking water. So and also they found that the level of these compounds getting into the water was the same if they just put water in the bottle and left it in the house. So, you know, then what you're faced with then is a question, is this going to cause cancer? Probably not. It's a probably not. There's a kind of a risk assessment here. You're probably more likely to get cancer from the fumes of cars when you're walking along any city street, or you're certainly going to get more risk of death from drinking dirty water. So then you get into this question of, you know, is it a perfect solution? And no technical solution is perfect. So no filtration system will make water 100% safe. It will reduce the risk of you getting disease from the water. Yes. So that's one way of answering it. And in the manual, there's some discussion on that. And I can send you some papers if you like, Roy.
Thank you. Please do.
Yeah.
Stephen, one of the slides you showed, very, very good talk. Very, I really enjoyed that and very engaged with it. Now, one of the slides you showed compared, it was your groups of 90 and compared those who were using SODIS with those that weren't and how they got on. And whilst the ratios were very good, I did notice that you still had quite high numbers of people getting diarrhea and other diseases.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from?
Well, it could come from various things. In say a child is using SODIS at home and goes to school and drinks water from a different source when they're at school, or handles dirty food, or goes to the toilet and doesn't wash their hands, or so there are lots of other ways in which you can get diarrhea. You can get infected with the bacteria or viruses or amoeba, which cause diarrhea.
So
you're not cutting out.
No.
What we weren't able to do was to have a sterile group. If you
so
see
what
what
I'm
I mean.
trying to get to is, are you pretty confident that none of those infections came from the water they were drinking, the SODIS water?
Well,
difficult to tell.
That's very difficult to tell. What we were trying to do was compare the health of users and non-users. Now, if some people, for example, took their SODIS water and put it in a pot, and then because that's a traditional way of storing water, and then when they go to get the water, they use a cup and then wash their hands before they dip into the water, they can get recontamination. So what I could agree with you is we couldn't eliminate that possibility that there was still some diarrhea causing pathogens in the SODIS water, but the tests we were doing, with the Delagua kit or the other tests we were doing, were showing that if you use SODIS properly, you do get rid of the disease-causing bacteria in the water.
Yeah, and so if you went into one of these developing world situations, or if I went, or if any other Westerner went who might have a less developed immune system, not having been exposed to so much stuff, would you be quite happy that they all used SODIS?
I would. I use SODIS myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, you've been out there for a while, and so you might have a more developed.
Probably.
Been there, been sick.
Yeah.
Yes. Can I add to that? When I was in Kenya, I stayed with a missionary couple who had a piped water supply from the shamba where they were staying. It was a church one, and it was piped. But rather than drinking straight from the pipe supply, they did use this SODIS system, and they said they always put their drinking water out every day for the same purpose, even though it was pipe system. And the Kitale system might have been quite good originally, but it's I don't suppose it's been maintained to the high standards anymore.
Yes, generally in most developing countries, Kenya included, you wouldn't trust any piped water system to be disease-free. So you either buy bottled water or you treat your water in some other way before you drink it. And I use SODIS to treat my water.
Yes.
So and I know lots of other people who do as well, individuals who weren't necessarily in Eldoret, across, like Roy says, there are other groups using SODIS across Africa.
Okay, it's helpful.
Yeah.
Please, if anyone else has got questions, then do jump in. But I did have this is all a parallel train of thought here. So within CED, we have quite an active rainwater harvesting program
Mm.
and ferro cement water tanks,
Mhm.
collecting rainwater off people's roofs.
Mm.
And there is the ideal that it goes through a washout system before it feeds into the tank. So if there's a flood of water, it'll
Yeah.
divert the first part of water, getting rid of all the bird poo and dust and all the rest of it.
Mm.
And then it goes through some sort of a filter before it goes into the tank.
Yeah.
But that tank is, you're going to get some crud landing in there.
Yeah.
And that water might sit there for 2 or 3 months.
Mhm.
What would you think? Have you got any comment on the water that's sitting in the tank, and would it be improved by using SODIS with it?
That's a good question, because we were promoting rainwater tanks, and we built hundreds and hundreds of rainwater tanks for collecting rainwater, and it was a way of getting clean water for many of the people we were working with. And generally, when we tested the water was clean. I mean, the water had, the fecal coliform count was 0. But if you want to be really sure and safe, use SODIS as well.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly rainwater is much, much cleaner than spring water or well water or river water or pond water. It's seen as a clean source of water, whereas in the West, of course, we see it as dirty water, which is crazy. There we go. But to be doubly sure, why not? It's not, certainly using SODIS is not difficult. But if you don't use it, when we did test rainwater from a variety of groups, and I was just looking at my list of places where we tested the water, and yeah, mainly the rainwater tanks were the raw water from a rainwater tank had zero fecal coliforms. And I have to say,
that have been sitting in the tank for some period of time, like months.
we didn't test that actually, but I would imagine so, because well, the water is collected over a period of time, so it's not you're very unlikely you're unlikely to have water which has just been sit there for a day or two.
Yeah.
And if they don't clean, what they really need to do in order to keep the water clean is make sure they clean the gutters, clean the tank once a year, use the first flush system you were talking about, and that helps to maintain clean water in the tank. I could talk to you about that as well, I think.
I think I'd appreciate that conversation, perhaps another time. Yeah, very good. Okay, so you very adequately answered all my questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And if nobody else has any more questions, then I'll probably just wrap this up. I really appreciate the talk. It seems like an incredibly simple solution, but therein lies its glory and its value. It's the ability to implement something that is going to be so efficient. It's almost too good to be true, and I suppose maybe that's why some people struggle with it.
Yeah,
it's something that I would like to take the risk and try it myself when I'm next overseas. Maybe not.
I think, Angus, they've continued to do further testing and research on SODIS, and they find that it's very effective in terms of bacteria, in getting, killing bacteria which cause diarrhea, the E. coli and things like that. The water temperature needs to get up to about 45 degrees for a period of time in order to really reduce the viruses and the protozoa. So that's why I say using SODIS, you can make the message very simple. Put your bottle out for 1 day. They say 6 hours, but certainly it's easier just to say 1 day. Put it out in the morning, go to work, do what you do, come in the evening, bring it back in. 2 days, because on cloudy times, because you have to get the load of ultraviolet passing through the water, which is why you don't have big containers. You need containers where the ultraviolet can get into the water. If you have a big container, the ultraviolet won't get through sufficiently. So that it's not, SODIS is not going to produce sterile water, but it is definitely going to make the water safe for drinking, and much, much safer than if you didn't use it. And even chlorination has its own drawbacks. Boiling can have its own drawbacks. Filtration, especially the low-tech kind of sand filtration systems, none of them you could say are going to produce sterile water. The system you said you use a UV filter. That's
in the house at home, yes.
At home. Well, that is really producing the sunlight at a high degree, so you're getting a huge amount of ultraviolet on that water.
Yep.
And so that's very effective.
But
It's the same system as your UV filter, except we're using the sunlight because it's free.
Yes. Yep. Okay, so I would also say that this has been recorded, and it will be, I said at the beginning, it will be available through CED and their YouTube channel in the next few days. And that then acts as a resource for people to tap into. So although we may not have had a large audience tonight, that resource is there for people to tap into going forward for years. And some of our talks have had over 1,000 views. So, it's proving a valuable resource. So I really thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate your time you've taken and the information you've given us. And I'd like to stay in touch personally to pick your brains a bit more.
Okay, that's fine.
So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Stephen.